Earlier this week, I had a young man who we'll call James book a one-to-one session with me, and he wanted my help to pass the Goldman Sachs Super Day. And I just wanted to make a video about it. I know that there's not a lot of information and people really enjoy kind of how I break down the processes for individual companies. I haven't covered assessment centers a lot. Goldman Sachs Super Day is a bit of a big deal. It's free by 30-minute face-to-face interviews. Sometimes it can be online depending on where you're at. The idea being is that you are interviewed by different people within the division. So it might be somebody who will work alongside you, somebody who will manage you, and then maybe the divisional director or even the partner, depending on how busy those people are on the day. They're hard. They're difficult things to do. 3 by 30-minute interviews doesn't sound like a lot, but it can really be quite draining, particularly if you're kind of like sitting there getting interviewed, sitting there getting interviewed. If you've not had a lot of face-to-face interviews before, you definitely want to practice on mocks. And what I want to go through is really what I went through with James the other day, and it just gives you a bit of insight. Now, my one-to-one consults are 45 minutes long. I feel like that's just enough time to cover like one big chunk of information, like one interview, one assessment center. I do a lot of them and I really enjoy them, and I've done them since 2013, so it'll be almost 12 years. Be 12 years this year. A lot of times it's the same. For Goldman Sachs Super Days haven't really changed in all the time that I've dealt with Goldman Sachs, so best part of 11 years. First of all, you want to make sure that you research the most recent and most relevant questions for your division. I tend to use Glassdoor for that. I've never made any secret of that. You can use other things, you know, you can go and use stuff like Wikijobs and Student Room, Reddit, but I tend to find Glassdoor is the purest form of information. Becomes a bit more difficult, even for a company like Goldman Sachs that might have 10,000 interviews listed. If you kind of sift down for your country and your division, you might find there's not that many. So generally you want to sift down by country. I like to look at questions that have been asked in the last 6 months because I want to see what's recent, what's new. I'm not that interested, though the format may not change, the questions or type of questions may change. And I tend to go into it. Specifically, James had asked me that I take him for a mock interview to really give him a good feel. So I put together sort of 9 or 10 questions, and I'll walk you through them and just some thoughts and some experience around prepping people, particularly for Goldman Sachs Super Day. I would say I don't deal with Goldman Sachs a lot, but I probably have dealt with this particular incident maybe 20 or 30 times. So a sufficient number of times to be able to kind of draw some conclusions based on my experience. So going through the questions, first of all was, tell me about yourself. In an interview, particularly in a face-to-face interview, tell me about yourself is so important to get right. First impressions matter. And really importantly, this is something that you can control. So very often, you know, people always complaining or zone in on the things that they cannot control, which is completely irrelevant. What if they're late? What if, you know, they're wearing a pink hat? What if they don't like me? You can't control that. But you can control a really killer personal introduction. Down in the description below, there's application success secret, which has a template. I sent the same template to James, which is basically, who are you? What are you doing now? What have you done in the past? What's your work experience? We're looking to hit it in about 60 or 90 seconds. And this is really important for graduates, and applies just as much for professionals, is, are you telling compelling stories? If I can kind of condense the thousands of one-to-ones that I've done over the past 11 years, really when I think about it, I'm just trying to teach people to be good and compelling storytellers. It's hard to be the best, and I will explain this because you don't know who your competition is. It's particularly hard to be the best when you're a graduate because essentially the margin of difference is quite small. By that I mean, went to a good university, got a good degree, got a couple of internships, but there is a reasonable amount of people who have done the same thing as you, and maybe thousands, tens of thousands of people. So really importantly, when you're trying to pick out some stories or really create good experiences that you can share, you want to think, what is the story that I can tell that no one else can tell? And it could be, you know, that you speak multiple languages, that you became very, very good at a particular skill, or just good at a number of skills. For example, you could say, well, I'm good at talking to people, I'm good at writing, and I'm part of my debate team. And this is a reasonably likely, but more unlikely set of skills, like a trifecta. And it's good to have a diverse range of skills that you can talk about. Most importantly, good stories are what stick in people's minds. And we're hardwired to like good stories. all the way back to the times when our ancestors would have clustered around campfires and shared the culture and the history of the village, of our people, to the younger generation to pass on before we were able to, right before the Assyrians came along and cracked that bit of code, writing stuff down on papyrus. We pass stuff down through stories. So genetically, we're hardwired for that. And good stories are specific. They have good pacing. They are talking about things which we can see. So for example, in the session that I had with James, he talked about an experience where he came to London. I said, look, be really specific. Who did you talk to? What did you do? What are the actual things that you achieved? Don't turn around and say, I've worked with a couple of clients. I've worked with 7 clients to structure 21 pitch decks. This is specific. It's an example that I give when someone says, Daddy, I saw a big dog. The father turns around to the son of the door and says, how big was the dog? And instantly the kid will be like, it was this big or it's this big. And, we want to create that idea of boundary, shape and size, right? And a good personal introduction is something that you can script and refine and do by yourself. And this is something that you can absolutely nail, because people probably won't look at your CV. They may not have the time, they may have the inclination, but not the energy to do so. And you have to think about the audience that you're speaking to. And if you're somebody that's working at Goldman Sachs, you're intelligent, ambitious and driven and time poor. And something that I know from my own personal experience owning businesses is that I do not suffer fools well. So if you come along and see me and you dither incessantly, I am already thinking about the next thing that I have to do. Why Goldman Sachs? Loads of people are light on facts when they're talking about why they want to work, even for a company like Goldman Sachs. James is a little bit like this, right? So just do your homework. Just pick out your 5 fast facts. Just relate it back to yourself if you want to, but read through the annual report. Really what we're looking for is somebody who's taken the 15 or 20 minutes that it's going to take for you to answer this question in a compelling way. And why do you want to do the role? Now, talking about why you want to do the role, and also a question that I followed up on was like, why X and not Y? Why M&A and not IBD? Why risk and not finance? Why operations and not tech? It's an interesting question, particularly if you come from a background, a degree which is not necessarily specific to the role that you're going to do for. Because essentially that degree is the burden of your experience that you're bringing to the table. Yeah, sure, you did internships and all that good stuff, but like, how much did you really do? You did 6 weeks during the summer. I realize to you that seems like a lot, but if you're sitting in front of a seasoned professional with a decade plus of experience, they're like, what's 6 weeks? It's a holiday. So what are you going to do in that role? Being really specific and understanding. James was great because he had experience that you could leverage. And if you do have experience that you can leverage that's relevant for the role, do that. If you don't have experience that's relevant to the role, leverage the skills that are similar. Most jobs are kind of the same in a way when it comes to soft skills, not the hard skills, but to be a trader and to be a McDonald's cashier, still there are some crossover skills, and you can cross these things over, working under pressure, being able to talk to people, dealing with difficult customers, being able to be highly numerate. I'm sure there'll be somebody who'll watch that and kind of scoff and be like, well, it's nothing the same. Well, they kind of are. When you really break it down, it's a different level of intensity, it's a different level of expectation and also pressure in terms of your ability to perform, but very similar. Something else to think about is commercial knowledge. Now, one thing that I've never purported to be, on Job Ready English or on any other medium I've helped people is I'm not here to help people prepare technically. I've never claimed to come from an investment banking background. I'm not here to help people learn, advanced Excel or data analysis using Python. Loads of great resources for that. But something that I always think is really important and gets left out, particularly in final interviews, is commercial awareness, commercial knowledge. So in the case of Goldman Sachs, could be something like big themes in macro markets and that investors are concerned about, the effect of Donald Trump, the effect of inflation, deflation, high interest rates, low interest rates. It's varied over the years, but it's pretty much the same theme. What the interviewer is looking for, particularly a company like Goldman Sachs, is they want somebody who's switched on to the market, who knows what's going on, who gets the gist, right? Because if they aren't, then You're not their type of people. Goldman Sachs is an interesting business because it has a very small footprint compared to its competitors. You know, when you look at somebody like Citibank or Bank of America with 250,000+ employees, and Goldman Sachs has about 20,000. Now, I'm sure the purists will say, well, they're completely different businesses. Yes and no. But the point is they're small, they're lean, they're much more agile than their competitors. What that means is they want people who are really switched on and who know about what's going on, have an opinion, and also have enough information to be able to have an opinion. You know, if your ability to form an opinion is based upon a single incident or a single exposure to something, you know, that's how racism happens. That's how sexism happens, right? Somebody has a bad experience with a brown person and says, oh, I hate brown people. That's because they base an opinion based on a single exposure to that thing. But they have more experiences and they meet more brown people, and then they're like, actually, you know, brown people are just people. Obviously, I'm not racist against brown people. I am one, but you know, just something to think about. You know, what's an interesting piece of business news? Just thinking about, you know, putting yourself in the mind of the customer, on the mind of the market. You don't need to know these things. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be able to recount stuff straight off of your head in the sense of commenting on, you know, the geopolitical landscape of 196 recognized countries. But having a feel for it and having some element of immersion, particularly through the final round, is so important, because it's something that's going to be, again, a big thing in their day, which was the predictive analysis of how these things will affect, you know, many other things. Knowing about what your division does. So, you know, for example, what are the services that they offer? What are the products that they offer? A simple trick that you can use is just downloading their annual report, putting it into ChatGPT if you have a premium version, and asking it to summarize the report in relation to your division. And that gave me lots of great inspiration for ways that I could dig a little bit deeper, and also prepare James to be a bit more of an impressive candidate than his compatriots. Because let's face it, modern day living makes a lot of people lazy. It makes people not so willing to delve beneath the technology, delve beneath what a computer says. Just go and read the damn thing for yourself instead of asking somebody else for a summary. What does this say? Well, it's just laziness. Why have you chosen to, you know, study that degree? Walking people through the specifics of your CV. Something that's really interesting that comes up a lot of Goldman Sachs is they want to know the ins and outs of your CV. Woe betide you if you lied. And the reason why they want to do that is because they really want to work out what's true and what's BS. What did you actually do? So you had an internship at XYZ, but is that just because your dad's a client? Is that just because your mum's in senior management there and you basically did a lot of photocopies, drank coffee, and, you know, sat at a desk on your phone? Or did you actually do something that's meaningful? And really what they're trying to look for is, where are the spaces in your life that you have put what you've learned into practice? Where is it that you have really executed on the things that you've learned to show me that you could do this effectively? It's like, you know, asking somebody if they could dig a ditch, and they say, yeah, sure, but have you actually dug a ditch? You know, have you ever dug a 6-foot ditch 5 meters long? Because if you have, you'll know that that's pretty difficult to do by hand. So you will have a greater distinction of experience than somebody who says that they could do it, but they've never actually done it before. And the kind of the big takeaway, and that was the sort of flavor of different questions that we went through. And of course, each interview is going to be different. One's going to be more culture fit, one's going to be more technical, one's going to be more competency and skills based. And knowing the job description inside out, you know, and if the JD is not very helpful, go and find a JD elsewhere. I'm often surprised at I would say, weakness of candidates who will pay me money to jump on a call, and they'll say, oh, I couldn't find a good job description. I'm like, really? You couldn't for 5 minutes go on the internet? And, you know, and constantly I'm going like, oh, here it is. Some other things to think about is, and this came up at the end with James, they said, so what's some really good questions that I can ask them that will make me memorable? I said, look, questions that make you memorable are kind of pattern interrupt. Pattern interrupts are something that comes from neuro-linguistic programming. So a good pattern interrupt would be like, what's the best piece of advice anyone's ever given you? What's the biggest mistake that you've made in this past year that you wish you could take back? What's the biggest lesson that you've learned? What's something that you believe is really important but not enough people are talking about? Or something that I can do now to begin to prepare me for this role? These are pattern interrupts because they ask you to look backwards or look forwards. They break you out of your just general, you know, day-to-day monotony. Hi, how are you? What are you up to? You know, if someone says, what's the biggest mistake you've made this past month? You're like, oh, that's a good question. Because it is a good question, because I really have to think about it. It's not something that I think about on a daily basis. I think the most important thing to end off with, you know, thinking about super days and in kind of final interviews, is what is the possible reason that they could have to say no? There's a really big thing, actually. And this is something in sales that we call objection handling. And actually, it's a predictive process. So you know in your mind the reasons why they could say no, which are within your control, right? I'm not talking about the fact that you don't feel very good because you went to the University of East London and you think everybody else went to Oxford or Cambridge. I'm talking about something that's realistic. So where you're saying, I've never worked in a bank before. Okay, so then you want to front load your answers to make sure you're showing that you have more than enough skills, soft skills, and that you've learned the hard skills. You know how to do Excel, you know how to do pitch decks, whatever the hard skills, and you want to kind of get ahead of it. So you don't want to wait there for them to answer the question, because then it already creates an element of doubt, right? But if you're the one that's smart, you'll get ahead of it and say, look, I'm quite mindful that I've not got probably as much banking experience as some of my competitors, but these are the areas that I'm really strong. Now, you don't have to state it like that if you don't feel confident enough to do that. And, you know, people love, you know, going back and forth like, well, should I say this, should I not? I mean, who knows? There are infinite possibilities and infinite people that you could speak to. Address those objections as soon as possible. And the last thing that I'll leave you with is, the more mocks you do, the better you'll be. It doesn't matter how good your script is, it doesn't matter how much you do your research, but if you don't do enough mocks, you don't do enough practice, you probably won't pass. Because essentially you're talking about a really pressurized situation, and you don't want to be practicing it first time while you're there. You want to be practicing it 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 times. And then turning up thinking, whatever happens, dude, I practice so much that it's just second nature. Hope that helps. Good luck. Bye.